What was going through your mind as you looked at this 5-minute Vladimir Putin rally appearance today?
Well, I was struck by the dreamy quality of it. Mr. Putin has this idea that God has something to do with his desire to bring Ukraine and Russia together by force. Over and over, he asserts that there's some kind of divine or mystical unity between these two countries. And if other people don't see this, if Ukrainians just want to live normal lives, if they think that they're Ukrainians and belong to a different country, so much the worse for them. There has to be a cleansing act of violence which will restore the world to the way it ought to be. So I was most struck by that, by this notion that there's a fragmented world and it's his job as leader of Russia to restore the world the way it ought to be. It's a vision which is quite disconnected, of course, from the reality of the way that Ukrainians are suffering for no reason, and also quite disconnected from the way that Russian soldiers are behaving in Ukraine.
So the country in this presidential rally report today got certainly no body count whatsoever, no progress report, nothing about this is what we've achieved, this is what we've taken, this is what we control, this is how many Nazis we have driven out. Just no assessment of the war whatsoever.
Well, what they got was a kind of picture about how things are supposed to work in Vladimir Putin's mind. He gave them this sense, this very idealized sense of Russian soldiers fighting together as brothers and being willing to lay down their lives one for the other. That's what I meant by this dreamy quality. As you say, there's nothing about how Russia is senselessly destroying a neighboring country, nothing about how it's bombing to smithereens cities which are a source of pride, not just for Ukrainians, but for people aside from this, all throughout the former Soviet Union. Nothing about how Russian soldiers who are sent there supposedly to protect Russian culture are killing Russian-speaking civilians every day. Nothing about the destruction of schools and hospitals, the maiming and the death of children. Nothing about what a war actually is. Only this kind of mystical vision that by violence, he's somehow bringing these countries together. So as you say, it is very striking. And of course, the fact that Russian soldiers are dying in such numbers, and the fact that this war is clearly not going the way that it was supposed to go, he doesn't even seem to have a story about that.
No, and no story about timetable, nothing about our soldiers will be back, by a certain time, or that we will be welcoming them back together here in the summer or something. I want to go to what the foreign minister said today, Sergei Lavrov. Let's listen to this.
We know the manners and the tricks which are being used by the Western countries to manipulate media. We understood long ago that there is no such thing as an independent Western media. If you take the United States, only Fox News is trying to present some alternative point of view.
So, Professor, they apparently have a favorite American TV channel.
Well, I can't help but observing, first of all, that Mr. Lavrov is speaking to RT, which is a state-owned, self-recognized Russian propaganda sender, which doesn't even pretend to be an objective source of news. And of course, they do have their preferences. Tucker Carlson has gotten an awful lot of favorable attention from the Russian media lately, including official guides to the Russian press asking them to cover and repeat certain lines that Tucker Carlson originally got from their propaganda in the first place. But if there's something to emphasize in all of this, it would be the work of the few remaining courageous, independent Russian reporters and the more numerous and also very courageous Ukrainian war reporters who are getting us the facts about what a war actually is. One thing that's striking about this war is that we can see it and we can understand it, and we can see that a war from the very beginning is a kind of crime. We can understand this not in terms of the airy concepts that a president gives at a rally, but in terms of the pictures that we're seeing now. A war means the senseless destruction of people's lives. And the fact that we can see this, the fact that it's being reported by honest reporters, makes it easier for us to see through that kind of rhetoric.
Professor, before you go, we are all sitting here unable to predict what happens next because it is all up to this one person who's very difficult to read at this distance. You have studied him over years, though. And so what I'm wondering about is Vladimir Putin wondering, how long will this go on? Is Vladimir Putin sitting there thinking, how much of this can I do? Can I do 3 more months? 3 more years? What would he be thinking about this?
I believe that things have played out this way. He did think that this really was a special military operation. He really did think that the Ukrainian people would be happy to have their own government overthrown. I think he's been surprised to see that there's been so much resistance. And I think he's having difficulty processing it because he really does believe in his own story about how Ukrainians and Russians are actually one people. Now that he's been proven wrong, he's in the classic position of a tyrant. He can never admit that he's made a mistake. He has no choice but to double down. But as he doubles down and doubles down again, the only operational choice he has is to kill more civilians, which puts him in an even worse moral and economic box as time goes by. So I think the only thing that he is wondering is not how this ends. I think all he's wondering about is, will this ever reach a point where I feel that my own power might be threatened? And I think it's at that point, and only at that point, where this war might come to an end.